I had the chance to interview a whale that spent well over $100,000 on gacha games. And through this chance, I learned about what it's like in the inner minds of someone with such disposable income from their unique perspective. Whaling is often stigmatized in Western gaming culture, with some even debating whether it's acceptable or just extremely harmful behavior. I have my pre-existing biases and beliefs regarding whaling as well, and it's through this exchange that I gained some insight on how there's another side of the story. My name is Psyche, and let's learn what whaling truly is. To start off, my guest Tuhu, formerly known as Toho Sniper 98 on YouTube, is a self-proclaimed gacha god, and a fellow content creator that typically does general discussion videos as well as documenting his ongoing accounts with monthly updates across the gacha games he plays. No, that background with 10 games running at once is not pre-recorded. He's actually just that deep into gacha. While this video will play snippets of the interview to solidify certain talking points, the full footage will be released by Tuhu on his channel.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Toho Sniper 98, but you can just call me Tuhu because the first name's a little too long. And I, like Mr. Psyche has said, am a gacha whale. Or at least I used to be for the bulk of my gacha career, if you want to call it that. I started playing gacha games back with FGO back in 2017 with the launch of the NA server. And I've been playing gacha ever since, steadily picking up more and more, to the point where I can call myself a gacha god. And nobody can really contest me on that because I'm currently playing a dozen gacha games and counting because I have more gacha games that I like to pick up. So it's probably the amount of money I spent on gacha games overall is probably over 100K. I don't know exactly how much. I probably should, but for the sake of my own sanity, I don't bother knowing what that number is.
Taking the first step is often the hardest. There is a psychological tendency called the sunk cost fallacy. It states that people are more likely to follow through with something if they already sunk some degree of investments into it. In the world of in-game microtransactions, studies have found that players that already spend money on a game are more likely to spend more at a later time. This is why a lot of games sell beginner packs that are dirt cheap, but contains very valuable items. Even if you spend as little as $1, you're now invested. And that becomes the anchor for you to psychologically justify spending more. Understanding the addictive nature of this practice, I asked Tuhu what his first dip into gacha game spending was, and how it felt like to experience it for the first time.
I have to kind of get into specifics of how I started playing FGO, or like the very early days of me playing FGO here. For me personally, I can say this right now, it wasn't necessarily sunk cost fallacy, though when I explain my story, maybe it can have shades of it, but that's up to you to judge. How I started spending on FGO specifically, for some backstory, one of my IRL friends kept bugging me to try out FGO. Hey, you should try FGO. Specifically, it was talking about the JP server, and I just wasn't very interested at the time until Anime Expo 2017. If you don't know what Anime Expo is, it's the largest anime convention out here in Los Angeles, Southern California, and turns out I really enjoyed it. I really liked playing FGO. It was very different. It was a very different game that I had never experienced before. I thought it was really cool that you can control these servants and you play like a turn-based game type thing, and it seemed really cool. And I got really super into it. I started grinding it quite a lot. By the end of the con, I had invested enough time and effort into it, so I was like, okay, I can justify putting in some money. I remember the first time that I spent money on FGO was after the con was over. Me and my boys, the group that I usually went to Anime Expo to back then, we're hanging out at this Korean barbecue restaurant just to celebrate the end of the con. And once we were done eating, I was like, all right, time to do it. Whip out my phone, and I put in my first $80 pack and start rolling. Right, that's how they get you. However, the reason why I kept spending was because I realized I really like collecting characters. That's my tick for me. I really enjoyed the feeling of obtaining new characters and then grinding materials to get them like all invested and stuff. I'm a little bit different from most players, most Gacha players, because I would assume, my assumption is that most Gacha players, or at least a lot of them out there, like rolling Gacha for the sake of rolling, right? Because obviously Gacha rolls tap into. You probably know this better than I do on like a psychological
Yeah,
level.
like
Appeals to our dopamine rush, our perhaps you could call it our primal psychological like desire to find like fancy new stuff, right? Because of survival instincts and whatnot. We can That's a whole nother topic for another day. But yeah, like you could argue, I could say that most Gacha players like rolling Gacha because of that. For me, however, I just wanted to get new characters so that I could grind for them, get them all leveled up, and be able to use them in battle, and as an extra, little, perk, flex them to my friends, and hey, here's what I have that you don't, that kind of thing. That never changed, and so that has always been my primary motivating factor of rolling or spending money on gacha games, is to primarily obtain new characters, not necessarily for the dopamine rush of rolling gacha in and of itself. So I actually had a purpose in that. I'm not sure if that's exactly like some sort of higher purpose. It's probably not, but that's my story.
whaling is often stigmatized in Western gaming culture. When you hear about someone that spends thousands of dollars on microtransactions, the response is usually not the most positive. As someone that's very open about spending habits, I wanted to ask Tuhu regarding his opinion on the matter.
So starting from the very beginning, whaling has always been stigmatized, even back when I played, and I'm sure it's always been that way even before then too. I will say that, or I want to make it clear that I do think this is more of a Western problem, and when I say the West, I mean like, English-speaking countries. Whaling is, I want to say, a lot more accepted out in the East, right, in Japan, Korea, China. So this is more of a Western issue. I don't want to call it a problem per se, but it can definitely be called an issue. But yeah, like I said, whaling has always been pretty stigmatized.
A common missed point is that whales are necessary for a game's survival. While the majority of players don't spend or only do so sparingly, the pillars of a game's continuous development have to be made up by whales. While this is typically not a problem in huge titles, the majority of mobile game fanbases are relatively small, and still need to maintain a steady player base and income to keep operating. People can have their monthly dose of PvP over revenue figures, and even though many believe that the reported numbers are inaccurate, if a particular game's numbers are consistently getting lower, there is enough reason to be worried. Not everyone needs to pitch in and fund the game that they enjoy, but whales need to exist so that free-to-players can keep playing for free. They become the hero that people don't want, but the hero they need.
Some people need to pay for gachas, right? And those are going to be your whales. Because gacha games are based off the free-to-play model, right? These games are free, but developing content for them certainly isn't. So the money's got to come from somewhere. And so, if at least some of your players decide that it's worth their time, it's worth their money to whale a whole lot, then that means that none of the rest of the other players need to pay. And personally, I don't really mind that model because again, it's spending money on gacha games is a personal choice. You don't have to do it most of the time, as long as the gacha game itself is good enough not to like force its players to pay for anything. I think that stigmatizing whales is not exactly a smart choice. I mean, if you do it ironically, that's one thing, but unironically hating on the people who are supporting your game, I don't know about that one, my dude. I've seen gacha games fail because all their whales, all their players have stopped paying for content, and the game just doesn't make any money anymore, and their company decides that, or the developers or their publisher decides it's not worth running those servers anymore, and so they close down. Trading cards have always been a thing, whether they're baseball cards or more popularly these days, actual trading card games like Magic, Pokemon, that sort of thing. Streamers and content creators still keep doing like Pokemon card unboxings and stuff like that, and yet nobody seems to have a problem with that, right? They're not stigmatized for oh, you're gambling for like a super rare card that you don't even know you're gonna get. And why is that? Why aren't they stigmatized? Is it just because they're physical items so you can resell them? Well, guess what, buddy? Chances are you're not gonna get a super rare like $1,000 card either. So it's like I'm not exactly like too convinced. Well, That's a bad way to put it. It's just like we've known about it, right? Us Westerners aren't completely ignorant of the whole gotcha or like the loot box concept. It's just that, in my opinion, the reason why gotcha games flew under the radar at the time was because, as you said, they were underground. They haven't hit mainstream yet. Gotcha games are only just starting to like ramp up in popularity, and without Genshin specifically, it would have taken it a lot longer to hit mainstream. It's just that Genshin happened, and all of a sudden, post 2020, everybody's familiar with everyone knows, like, or at least a lot more people these days kind of know what a gotcha game is.
One point that Tuhu highlights is not the stigmatization of whaling, but rather the strange sense of elitism of being free-to-play. According to Tuhu, there are some that feel that the status of free-to-play is a symbol of entitlement. Of course, while there's nothing wrong with being a free-to-play, developers often don't benefit very much from such players. Since everyone has their budgets and personal goals, there's often no point in putting a specific spending mindset on a pedestal. Otherwise, it would be like telling someone that they're playing the game incorrectly.
Out here in the West, I have noticed that there is a sort of free-to-play players, a lot of them, anyway, not all of them, of course. I'm sure there are chill, free-to-play players out there, but there's quite a few free-to-play players who make their free-to-play status a status symbol. They pride on being free to play, that they see themselves as the quote-unquote superior players just because they decide to not spend any money on the game, either because they can't, right? They just don't have the money to, which is fine, or they choose not to, which is also fine because, I understand if you don't want to support like predatory, predatory business model, and gotcha games are kind of that. No matter how generous a gotcha can be, that you can always argue that a gotcha system is predatory. I'm not going to argue against that. In fact, I would agree to varying degrees. But the problem for me, and I think other people should also see as kind of an issue too, is that the moment when people use their statuses as a way to put themselves on a pedestal so that they can call themselves better players, whatever that means, that's an issue. Because that just kind of sours the whole, I guess, community, I suppose. Like, puts in unnecessary tensions and like unnecessary cracks in a community that you'd rather not have. Especially the smaller community is, the more susceptible it can be to, like, obviously infighting in community, like within the same community. Like, I don't want to call it like civil wars or anything, but like basically we don't need that kind of vibe in a gacha community. Yeah. One of the only differences between all of us is that how much money we decide to spend, and that's a purely personal decision, or at least it should be.
Tuhu is someone that has gone through the ringer with older era gacha games, and back then things worked a little bit differently. Pity was not yet standardized, so it was completely possible to get unlucky and end up spending hundreds of dollars and not get what you want. So, I asked for a more personal question. Have you ever regretted your financial decisions?
Overall, no. I don't regret the whaling that I've done personally. Now, I am, like, my case is unique to me, or in other words, how I should put it is, if you ask other whales, they will have differing opinions too. I'm sure you can find a whale out there who's like, yeah, I kind of regret like spending this much money on this particular gacha game, or just gacha games in general. But for me personally, because my rationale for getting into whaling in gacha games to begin with was for the sake of obtaining new characters and leveling them up and then using them in game, because that's kind of the whole point of me whaling. So personally, I don't regret any of the money that I did spend. I guess the one way that I would say that I regret it, if I were to count this, is that 2 years ago I lost my original job due to a layoff that allowed me to whale in the first place, and I tried turning into like a gacha content creator. Unfortunately for me, that hasn't really been working out over the past 2 years, and so a lot of my savings that I had saved up from that first job kind of like dried up, and so now I'm just kind of like surviving on fumes at the moment. So in that sense, maybe that I regret whaling on gacha games, but still. Gacha games is my passion, and that I'm always going to hold on to that. I don't regret the money that I did spend, and I don't plan on like beating myself up over that, because the past is the past, now is now. And so I just keep trudging along, keep powering forward as I usually do.
Recalling horror stories from FGO in the old days, Tuhu brings up an experience that caused a major exodus in players.
We have plenty of horror stories. The absurd amount of money we've had to drop for like a single character before. My example that I mentioned to you earlier over Discord is that back in 2018, when we had the first summer event for FGO, mind you, this was before Pity. I had to drop 1,700 Saint Quartz for my first copy of Tama Lancer. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of about $800, real US dollars. And for perspective, I spent about $800 to get C6R1 Yoimiya in Genshin Impact. To be fair, I got very lucky with my Yoimiya pulls. Like, I got a couple of early 5 stars, and I only got like spooked like once or twice, or I lost a coin flip like once or twice, and that was it. But still, like, that should kind of give you like some sort of at least a little bit of perspective on how absurd FGO and other old school gachas before the age of like standardized pity existed. My favorite anecdote relating to this that I always like pulling up was the original mass exodus back during the first Halloween event of FGO. Because to put some context here, back when FGO first came out, our very first like waifu banner of the game was Tamacaster, who first debuted in Halloween. And so, because of that, because she was the first waifu banner of the game, a lot of players, saved up for like the first 3-4 months of the game just to roll on her. And so when the day came, when her banner finally dropped, we all went. A lot of people, a lot of the players went all in on her, just to get fucked. Because again, FGO has no pity. It's got a 1% SSR rates, and at those rates, and as a result, the subreddit and other FGO forums back then immediately got flooded with what I like to call salt boards of just comments on comments on comments on comments of just people bitching about like how they spent this many Saint Quartz, how they grinded the game for all these months just to get shit on. And so a lot of the players just left, never to come back. They just quit the game cold turkey, and that was it. We never saw them again. Because that's when they learned just how cruel FGO's gacha truly was.
The pity system is something that has been standardized in today's gacha games. It serves as a safety net to ensure that even if you're the unluckiest soul out there, there's a hard cap on the amount of currency you have to spend in order to get what you want.
Pities allow players to plan ahead, basically, especially with the way Genshin Impact implemented them, right? When Genshin Impact first came out, it introduced and standardized the idea that the idea of a hard pity, right? Obviously unique to it, or maybe some other gacha games do this too, but it also has soft pity, so that, kind of throws players an extra bone here. But at the very least, it has a hard pity. And what that does, along with its other gacha perks, such as, alternating guaranteed rate ups, and the fact that your pity does carry over in between banners, like the game remembers how much you spent on a banner, and so it keeps your pity intact. All those mechanics together allow players to plan ahead.
Ever since the release of Genshin Impact in 2020, the gacha game industry has been on the rise, even in Western gaming. Given that many new players might be curious enough to wander into playing one, as a veteran in the space, what is the biggest misconception that new gacha players have?
Oh, the biggest one is that gacha games are pay to win. Easily. I mean, anytime I go into a non-gacha stream, say I go into Asmongold's stream and Asmongold starts talking about gacha, for example, for whatever reason, guaranteed half his chat, if not more, is gonna immediately start going, Omega lol gacha, right? Oh, the pay to win gacha, stuff like that. That is the single biggest misconception about gacha games. And it's understandable because, again, out here in the West, we Westerners have our predisposed position against gacha games because we essentially see them as like glorified loot boxes. Whenever non-gacha players look at gacha games, the first thing that a lot of them think is, oh, they're pay to win, because they see a gacha game, right? A game or a genre rather that focuses on you spending a currency, either in-game or real, sometimes even both, in order to acquire a character, which is essentially paywalled most of the time. So they see that like, oh, okay, gacha games are pay to win, right? When in reality, most gacha games are not like that, simply because, well, gacha games can't even be pay to win if they don't even have any PvP. So that whole argument, and most gacha games, I would say, don't have any PvP, and even if they do, it's not very serious. The whole pay to win argument is already moot from the very beginning, and yet people insist on saying that gacha games are somehow pay to win anyway.
Ultimately, the choice falls onto you. As everyone comes with all walks of life with different backgrounds, don't let others dictate your spending habits. The most important aspect here is to practice self-control and keep track of your spendings.
I always say that if you want to whale, well, first of all, make sure you have the money to waste, right? Treat this like gambling. Don't spend money you cannot afford to spend, right? Especially in gacha games, because you're basically never going to see that money back. It's not, at least in real life gambling, you at least have a small chance of getting your money back. Here, there's no chance. If you truly enjoy a game, right? Even if you're super casual and you just want to pull for the characters because you just really like a character, if they're what makes you happy, then sure, go ahead. You should be able to spend that money as long as it's money you can afford to spend. Whaling in gacha games is a very personal thing because gacha games are very personalized, or at least that's kind of how they're designed to be, to appeal to players like personally. So if you really want a particular character, and the only way you can get them, or an easier way to get them is by spending money, sure, go ahead, right? You shouldn't have to be judged for that. But however, if it turns out that like spending money becomes like a psychological problem to you, then you should probably stop doing that. Because at that point, if it's psychological, if it's something mental, then yeah, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to control that. But at the same time, it's like, as I still have to say, as long as you are prepared for what is about to happen and you are willing to accept the consequences that come your way, sure, go ahead and whale. But if you don't think you're prepared, if you don't think you can control yourself, once you spend money for the first time, and that again unleashes the floodgates for you, so to say, then maybe hold back.
As a saying from the gambling scene can often arise, know your limit, play within it. Thank you for tuning in. For the full version of the interview and other gacha discussion content, check out Tuhu's channel as well. Let me know what you agreed or disagreed with, and as always, have fun out there.